You're listening to RevOps FM with Justin Norris. You know, the classic way of describing RevOps is people, process, and platforms. And while that may not be a perfect formulation, it's a pretty accurate description of what we do. What they don't tell you in RevOps school is that the people pillar is by far the hardest one to manage. Building in systems, creating processes, those are challenging, but they're ultimately rewarding things to do. You get a big payoff at the end when there's a finished product, and you have a lot of control. On the other hand, getting other people to actually do something is a whole other story, and it can be maddening to work with revenue teams that seem determined to do anything but follow the process that you've designed. I'm not suggesting anyone is out to get us, but it does point to the fact that enablement is a huge part of our job. In RevOps, and it often doesn't work very well. We create documents that no one reads, they sit in knowledge bases that no one visits. We spend our time responding to Slack messages from confused users or sending chatter reminders, asking people to just please follow the process for like the 500th time. And I may be exaggerating a bit to make a point, but not by much. So today's guest thinks that there is a better way to do software enablement, and he helped found a company to deliver on that promise. It's called Tango. And our guest is the company's COO, Dan Giovacchini. Dan, so glad to have you here.
Great to be here, Justin, and really well articulated opening on a lot of the challenges I think that folks face out there with change in management, and that's exactly what we spend most of our days thinking about.
Cool. I spend a lot of my day dealing with those exact challenges, so they hit close to home. And I'm wondering, Dan, as I was looking through your background, I saw you spent about 7 years in the VC world. So before we pivot into Tango and enablement and all that, I want to be opportunistic and just get your perspective, putting your VC hat on again for a minute. What is going on? We've experienced a fairly strange reset in the market over the past few years, impacting a lot of SaaS companies. Things have really changed. The old playbooks don't work the same anymore. What are you thinking about as kind of a founder? What should other founders be focused on to survive and thrive in this environment and that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, for so long, it seemed like there was finally a sense of normal and bull market. And, it was just bigger fundraising rounds happening year after year. And then suddenly we hit this new bear market. And in some ways, economic tightening and economic slowdown is part of what precipitated that. But, it was also, we were probably just overheating on a number of areas of software spend in particular, and markets that kind of founders and VCs both looked at and said, oh, we've seen this happen somewhere else, and why can't it happen here? Like the Uber for X playbook or something for every market. And kind of where that got us, I think, is starting to really get back to, when you think about the customer, what are their organizational level challenges and problems, and what are their operating hurdles that they need to get past? And no matter if you're a founder, your company, working on an end user focused tool in the marketing stack, or if you're something that helps, org wide for HR, you really all have to tie back to some organizational level initiative. And if you can't map to a customer OKR, you should stop and think about how you can. And so, I think that slowdown in funding and the difficult fundraising environment, kind of 2021 to 2023, it started to reinforce probably some healthier innovation behaviors and healthier, really like product marketing and sales pitches from founders and companies.
I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's episode, Knack. I love marketing automation software, but let's be honest, the email and landing page builders are usually terrible. You can't make it nice without a developer, and marketers are going to find a way to break things or go off brand. You do not have time for that. So Knack is totally different. You set the guidelines and then give your users a building experience that's slick, modern, and beautiful. When they're done, everything goes to your map at the push of a button. And don't worry, it supports global teams, approval workflows. It's got your integrations. So head on over to revops.fm/knack, that's KNAK, and get a special offer just for my listeners.
And then AI has obviously just become the theme of the moment. And there's never been a better time to be insanely curious about what's possible. If you're an operator within a company and all these new tools and technology that's available, or if you're a vendor yourself or a founder or a VC and think about your product and your long-term value creation path, right? At the same time, that's a lot of noise. And so, how do you cut through the noise and make sure that you're building a product or a business or a service that matters for a long time? That's getting back to that probably, healthier behavior of saying, hey, how do we map to real organizational level challenges and problems for our customers?
It seems like for about 10 years, it was almost like a crazy drug trip or something like that. And now things have kind of come back down to reality in the sense that customer acquisition costs that are completely untethered from business fundamentals were sort of normalized. Software purchasing behavior that doesn't really make sense economically is kind of normalized. So I definitely see what you're saying as someone who's often a software buyer and is having to make business cases for software. The rules of that game have definitely changed for me, and I think for a lot of my peers. How have you found the discussion around your category of kind of like enablement and digital adoption? Have the dynamics there changed at all?
They really have changed with AI, especially in the last year or two here. And ChatGPT came out, and a lot of founders and a lot of VCs looked at the underlying models ChatGPT used and said, okay, this is amazing. What else is possible? And I'd say we're still in the middle of a big discovery phase here for where's the application layer of value going to accrue, and where are we going to start to see the massive productivity improvements that people are sensing that are possible, but we're still waiting to come to fruition in a lot of cases. And a couple early examples of areas that you've seen impact right away, certainly data analytics tools, certainly customer service conversations, and you can point to vendors in those categories that have started to just show ROI cases that have kind of never been seen before. But as you think about enablement and process and, a lot of the world that both you and I spend a lot of time in, what you're starting to see is potentially two paths to take in enablement. And one is somewhat search focused, query focused, and you can think ChatGPT, you can think Chat UX, you can think Glean is a company that's been more and more talked about on the venture scene. But okay, we can be really information centric and center our enablement initiatives around unstructured text knowledge, right? And we're just going to bet that operators are going to know the right questions to ask, and they're going to be able to go retrieve answers. And we were able to suddenly index all that information in a much more powerful way. And AI is going to help serve results, and that's going to improve how people work. There's another path that's probably more, the path we're going down, right? Which is just in the flow of work enablement. And so that's almost betting that, hey, instead of being information centric, let's be process centric. Let's think about where a user or operator is spending time, what tools they're in, what information might they need, when might they need it, and let's try and serve it to them proactively or make it available at their fingertips in such a way that we're not actually requiring them to go and understand the right query to be asking to unblock themselves or to do their job better, to find answers, to serve a customer, kind of whatever it might be. So I think that's kind of where there's two paths in front of us in the enablement space, and you're seeing companies take kind of two different approaches if you want to be simplistic. And, there's going to be a place for both, but it's sort of within, if you're an operator, you kind of should start to think about, which one makes most sense for your situation, for your company.
When we think about the sorts of RevOps use cases we often encounter, CRM enablement or some other sort of tool enablement, or you have a revenue or marketing sales CS user needs to do a certain thing in a certain place. The in the flow of work model just seems commonsensically the way to go, because nobody cares to go, like you said, ask a question or know the right question. There's so much more room for error. There's so much more user discretion. Why not just show them what to do in the moment that they need to know that information most and in the place where they are? And we'll get a bit deeper into Tango itself, but I'm just curious, like at the market level, what's the argument against doing that? Because it just seems that is the way that you should do it to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's different information types, right? So there's a lot of the unstructured conversation that happens about product, customer, market, competitor, internal strategy, decisioning, And a lot of that just fundamentally lives within a Slack, a Teams, a knowledge base, email. And so, there is golden knowledge that lives there. And, how do you potentially surface that in ways? And if we think, hey, you're a seller and you're talking to a new account for the first time, and there's been some new product developments that perhaps you should be aware of for that account, or there's been some new competitive intel that's been discussed somewhere. If you actually want to surface that information, for that seller, you're going to want to potentially search against a lot of these other knowledge repositories. And, it's not to say you can't serve that up in the moment, but right now we're in the flow of work enablement, where that technology is and that thinking is, it hasn't quite incorporated all of that general market company customer information. So that's probably just still a bridge that kind of needs to be crossed technologically to start to make that all available. But I totally think the end vision, if we put our heads together, should be, let's proactively serve this up when people need it and not require them to search for it.
Got it. Cool. Well, we'll dig a bit more into that, but maybe first we'll just turn back the page a little bit and just talk about founding a company, starting with this idea, and how you go from there to MVP.
There's a lot of thoughts and literature out there on founding a company and the best way to go about early product development, problem discovery. There's a couple of things that I think have stood true as far as the test of time and just fundamental truths about good innovation practice. And I think there's a couple of things that are pretty outdated. So for starters, the first trap to fall into is feeling like you have a great idea and you have a solution that the market just needs and you go just build it. It's how a lot of founders and it's how a lot of stories get told about companies is you have this sudden golden insight about something that you or others have experienced and you just go build it. It's so often not the case. And you go look at the actual evolution stories of companies in their earliest days, and you can start with an idea, but it's going to iterate so much. It's going to change based on the first time you go and actually ask about what are those organizational level OKRs that you have? What are actual problems that are top of mind for this ICP that you thought you understood? What other competitive products are out there that maybe you weren't aware of? And so the quick lesson there is just you should really think about entering a problem space and not entering into building a solution. And the more you can be curious about your problem space early on and be open and flexible to iterating and serving true north on your compass as how do we provide the most value for customers that they uniquely do not have somewhere else, that's what's going to really guide you down I think the most successful path. The other one is related to building too, and this could apply for products or services, but the lean startup method came out and this minimum viable product concept came out pretty early on in sort of entrepreneurial lore. And what still stands true about it is you should absolutely be going to get feedback as fast as possible. What has changed is you should not be launching half-baked versions of a solution. So, as you get through that problem space discovery and as you figure out something that you have a strong hypothesis is going to be a game changer for your customer, you really need to take advantage of your launch moment. And this is due to the cost of starting a company, of creating a product. All of that is being driven down to zero. And even with AI, right, people are going to create products and software and services, way faster than they ever had historically. And if you're an individual contributor, if you're a buyer, user, champion, no matter what you are at a company, there's just hundreds and thousands of products that you can be going to try every day. And the excitement of something new, it's very much become noise and less become a delightful moment in your day. So if you're going to come out and launch a new product or service to the world, really try and get your launch right. So we read this article early on from First Round Review. They put out amazing content, especially for builders of companies in the early stages. And the title of the article is Don't Serve Burnt Pizza. And it hit us just at the right moment in time. And we sort of made it one of our manifestos. But think about creating a minimum lovable product, not just a minimum viable product. And that means first impressions really do matter. Take the extra 6 months to really get your product marketing right, to really put that extra design touch, if you are a product company, to really think through that service offering. So when you launch, you can take advantage of that. And that early momentum is what you're going to need to propel you in those early days to then be on the path to whatever it is, securing more funding or reaching more customers or hiring more of your team.
You know, that narrative around iteration has been a constant, I think, with every founder that I've spoken to that has come on the show. I think Eloqua started as a chat product. Marketo started as some sort of AdWords interface. Like, the ideas changed really drastically. I'm curious, how did you know when you had iterated to the place where you had something that was a minimum lovable product, as you put it?
Yeah, awesome. So we actually set out to solve this, be curious in this problem space of learning on the job and solve this kind of crappy problem we felt was out there of just, it takes too long to get good at what you do. And this is really from a tactical perspective of how do I be successful in my new role at a company. And we did more discovery, and we kind of traced this path to, well, learning the tools that you use is actually this like kind of fundamental barrier to contributing to job performance and getting past that ramp or nesting period into, you know, okay, I'm actually taking inbound volume for the first time, or I'm, you know, answering chat conversations, you know, that are real live customers. But we, you know, for us, it was, okay, we think there's an interesting hypothesis or idea around the best people on your team have figured out something unique to your company about how to be successful and how they work. And we borrowed this a little bit from Gong and Chorus in the sales tech stack, where they figured out that, you know, hey, there's a lot of golden insight for teams and companies in the conversations of your top sellers. And they're doing things on those sales calls that everybody could learn from. And so we went around and got curious about, hey, learning on the job is really hard. Is this a problem for you as a VP? Is this a problem for you as a new hire? We got a lot of certainty and learned that, hey, this would be a problem worth solving. And then we had this hypothesis of like, if you could actually understand what makes Susie from Scottsdale so good at what she does, and then make that the basis for training and enablement, would that potentially be interesting? And we kept pulling on that thread. And so we did get into product development. And what we realized is that, you know, whoa, this wasn't just something for customer support or for, you know, BPOs and call centers, where learning the actual click process or click stream of how do I navigate my tools was valuable, and actually spread to way more functions. And it was way more of a horizontal problem space than we kind of initially realized. And the moment it clicked for us that we were close to something that was minimum lovable was we went and did these controlled pilots with 5 or 6 different teams at 5 or 6 different companies, different functions, and it was free. We tried to charge initially, but that was even difficult. And so we just made it free. And it was the moment where instead of us just like begging people to use it, they started to use it on their own, and they started to ask about, hey, would this be possible? Would there be more features here? Hey, could I get somebody else on? And so, you know, we use this like kind of controlled beta environment to sort of assess some of that minimum lovable component. And we said, okay, we think we have something here. Now let's take the 3 to 6 months extra to go get this ready for a launch. And, you know, we're going to make a bet that we can really land a first impression based on these early learnings with a broader audience. And we were fortunate that we did.
When you mention those horizontal use cases, I'm curious, what are some good examples? Because I was mentioning before we hit record, I've used Tango a few times in my company, but it's been mostly focused on software navigation, clickstream stuff, like you said. Where would you go from there?
Yeah, so you kind of look at it and we realize that like, hey, the target market for trying to teach other people how to use software, it's really anybody who's tried to take a manual screenshot, paste it in a Google Doc, and write out some steps and send that to somebody to tell them how to do something, right? Or in a Slack thread or in a email conversation. And so we really thought it was like going to be customer support and potentially call centers again, but it was every function from engineering to consultants and consulting firms to HR professionals. You're trying to learn how to use the performance management software. And I guess we just didn't totally realize that this friction really does exist. As much as software has improved, the ability to go get tasks done, we take it for granted in a lot of cases. And especially from an ops and enablement perspective, people are very familiar with tools, very, very tech savvy, especially if you're in a venture-backed company. But you think about other people who using technology is not the central component of their job, and it's frustrating, and people don't want to spend the time going and learning in the help docs how to use the software or navigate it and try and trial and error on their own. So that's kind of what I was referencing when, horizontal is just this peer-to-peer teaching of how to use software tools.
Across more functions, more teams, sort of anywhere in the organization.
Exactly.
So you have that magic moment where you're like, oh, this is something that people want to use. And I can imagine that's a very interesting feeling as a founder who's gone through this sort of hero's journey of building a product and iterating on it. Then you start to think about go-to-market and how to commercialize it at a bigger scale. What was the dialogue there?
Last November, I watched as my LinkedIn feed blew up with posts from people at Mopsapalooza. They were raving about the conference and having the best time. Don't miss out like I did. This November, Mopsapalooza is back in sunny Anaheim, California, and it's going to be the marketing ops event of the year, packed with hands-on learning from real practitioners. This is the only truly community-led, tech-agnostic MOPS conference out there. It's got the best speakers, the best networking, the best social events, maybe even a trip to Disneyland. This isn't your 50,000-person tech company conference. It's an intimate gathering of folks who are in the trenches every day, and registration is capped at 700 attendees. Tickets are going fast, so go to revops.fm/MOPS. That's revops.fm/MOPS to sign up today.
You basically have 2 to 3 choices when you're launching a product and thinking about go-to-market motion today's day and age, right? And you have a bottoms-up version where you say, hey, you think anybody can use this. You think that your product can somewhat teach itself. And then you have a top-down version where you're saying, hey, the value of this software, the benefits of this service need to be explained. They can't be taught or discovered. And then maybe you have something in the middle where there's interactive demo experiences started to become more popular, and you can use that to divert people into sales conversations or a self-serve journey. So maybe that's a new one that's kind of emerging more. But, for us, we looked at it, and again, we had initially thought, okay, this is very targeted at a couple specific functions. But when we realized that, hey, this is more horizontal than we thought, really the litmus test for should you go bottoms up or should you go horizontal PLG is how quickly can you provide time to value and get users to an aha moment. That's basically referring to, can they get something of value from using your product in a single player fashion in more or less 60 seconds or under, right around there. And if you can, you're going to see a lot of benefits of bottoms up and PLG. People are going to go in, understand your product, get something from it, be so wowed that they're going to want to tell people about it. They're going to want to potentially come back to it and think more about how they could use it in a bigger fashion, make it part of their routine. If you can't, then you're very likely just to get a bunch of tire kickers early on. Maybe they're interested in checking it out, but you're not going to get people hooked. And that could be for a couple reasons. It could be, do you have a fundamentally multiplayer experience? Do you need multiple people involved, a team to actually get value from your products? If you do, it's going to be very hard to convince that first person who finds you to invite a team to try something out. It's too much to ask without having ever proved anything to them or given value to them up front. Or if it's not multiplayer, but the product experience actually just fundamentally is more complex or requires more configuration or setup, then you're really going to need to teach them why they need to do it, and super unlikely you're going to be able to do it in a self-serve fashion. You're going to want to talk to them and have somebody really experienced sell the benefits and get them into a trial or a sales process.
So I'm making an educated guess, the bottom-up motion is where you land. At least that's how I've encountered your tool. And I will say to your credit that it is pretty easy to go through it. Maybe it's a good time to I'll describe to you my experience as a user of a tool like this, like what I did. Tell me if I'm wrong, but you sign up, you go and you hit record, you do a thing like in CRM, click, 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 and it just captures those steps for you, like screenshots each one, sort of automatically describes what you're doing. And then you can go through and beautify the descriptions and tweak them. But that to me was the aha moment. It's like, oh, it just sort of captured it all right there in this kind of magical way and created an experience for the user consuming that I think is objectively just much better than a Google Doc with screenshots, or even like a Loom, which I also really like. But a Loom, you have to like kind of hunt and search and start and stop. And this really does have it broken out in a very nice way. So is that the typical experience that your users are going through, what I just described?
That's the typical experience. 100% of our users go through that exact experience you just described. And what we intentionally designed into that experience actually borrowed on a lot of game design principles. And we recently actually put out a little piece about this, but there are specific mechanics built in to ensure that you as a user are going to get something of value within that 60 seconds. And we're not going to let you go necessarily on side quests early on. So we're not actually going to give you power user features as you're going through and capturing your process. We're not going to let you edit it while you're in that recording session. We're not going to let you turn on audio, video, and actually make a video out of it. It's very intentfully designed to get you to a near finished state, or an actually over 60% of cases, it's an already finished state, really without ever getting tempted to do anything other than do your process with Tango capturing it. And then we're showing you the process you're capturing, and we're sort of teaching you how the product works as you go through that first capture experience. So it's very intentional. We put every user basically through that capture journey, and they, at the end of it, have something of value, and they've learned how the product works. And that's part of what fueled our bottoms up motion, and why a lot of people refer to it as very intuitive and easy to use.
Now, the challenge I imagine, or I'm curious about, is if I take my company for an example, like I said, we probably have one or two or a small handful of Tangos in our org. Whatever we have, obviously under the free plan of what you offer, what's the moment of truth that is going to get a user to go from that stage to actually we need to put up a credit card to get the value that we're looking for?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, the first aha moment is getting you excited as a free user. It's capturing your first workflow on your own software. And that's number one in sort of our activation journey. There's sort of two separate paths we want you to go down. You know, if you're a smaller company, if you're a freelancer, you're an SMB, we potentially want you to swipe your credit card and become a paid user. We strive that say, hey, if you're a power user, 10% of the free users in that market, we think should sort of be paid users. And the ones where we want that to be true are if you have needs around branding, or if you have needs around security. And so we say, hey, if you're using this in a power user fashion, it's likely that you're using Tango to build your own service or product, right? Or to like offer Tango to a customer, or you are using it within your team in a way that you really do need more privacy or more branding. And if you're just otherwise using it casually, or it is more of a one-off thing for you, then we want it to be free, because we want you to share more create more Tangos, share them, and not feel inhibited. So privacy and branding are the two where we want you to pay as a SMB or freelancer user of Tango. If you're within a larger company, we want to convert you on what's possible with your team and within a larger software training initiative. So if you're creating documentation, it's likely because there's some bigger effort happening at your company. You're either bringing on new hires, you're rolling out new software, you're doing a process improvement project, you're teaching reps. If you're in RevOps, you're teaching reps about how to use some new functionality, some new field perhaps within the CRM. So we want to then convince you that, hey, there's a really powerful team-based experience here where this is our newest offering. Actually, if you actually get your whole team on board, we're going to let you pin these updates and these processes right on top of the software that people are using. And it's no longer going to be a link that you send them in Slack or living in an LMS or a knowledge base. So you talked about you guys use it as a free user. That's great. We want you to get excited about what Tango can do to potentially help here and there with the process. At some point, we would want you to be convinced that, oh, hey, we do have these larger software training initiatives, and there's suddenly a powerful team-based experience where we should talk to the Tango sales team about how we could set that up on top of our CRM or on top of our core business software and benefit even more.
So let's pivot in a bit deeper into that product experience, because that what you just described, that overlay, wasn't something I'd seen before. I saw it on your website just while prepping for this interview, and I thought, oh, that's really cool. It's kind of like those like onboarding wizards that you get sometimes when you first sign up for a product, but those are often very annoying because they constrict you a little bit, and you almost feel like you're not, like they're mediating between you and the product. Whereas this, at least in the example that I watched, it was quite fluid, like it's actually just guiding you along through what you need to do. So maybe just talk about that and what you've seen so far, perhaps in the market, or what your vision is for how people would implement that.
Yeah, totally. So we're big believers that for learning process or learning software, you should learn while you're using it. You should learn, actually, in this case, the CRM, right? So the alternative, the status quo, maybe what a lot of folks do today, which totally understandable, but what it is you're sending out a Slack update, you're jumping on top of a team call and screen sharing a new process, or you're sending out a Loom video to talk through something. And people are going to hear it. Perhaps a couple people who are particularly good with technology or savvy will pick it up. And there's going to be a lot of people who kind of just ignore it. They're going to forget. They're going to listen with one ear, and they're not going to take the new tool or the new process and incorporate it into their workflow. What do we want instead? Well, we basically want that the first time you're going to go, for example, you're creating a new deal in the CRM, a new opportunity, and there's a new field that you need to fill out. We want you at that exact moment to learn and be more or less instructed that, hey, this new field has been created. Here's exactly how to use it. And all you have to do is, in our case, hover over this tooltip or have this process appear. For the first time, you're on one of those subpages or a page. We do a lot with kind of URL detection in our product. And that's when you're actually going to see it and see, okay, well, I now know that this is exactly the new process update. And you're far more likely to incorporate that into your routine, having learned it right in the moment that you need it or should be doing it. So that's the kind of fundamental argument for people learning software and process. Retention and compliance and adherence is going to be so much higher if it's right there when they need it versus done separately and hope that somebody remembers.
Do you have any data, like a data point around adoption is X% higher, or like how much more quickly someone could learn a process if they're doing it this way versus reading an article in a knowledge base or seeing a synchronous training like 3 weeks ago and then they go to do it and it's already been forgotten at that point?
Yep. So kind of the easiest thing to measure has been with kind of net new software rollouts and try and compare either to a similar rollout at the company that did not use Tango or perhaps the same software rollout at a different company. And I'll mention a case study that we just did to help illustrate, but there's a large Workday rollout. So this is more HR software, less CRM, but a 1,500 person company had to roll out Workday and teach everybody at the company, okay, here's how you use Workday to find your pay stubs, submit for PTO, enroll in dental insurance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what they found with Tango, by putting the instructions kind of exactly on the screen where people needed them, that they saw a 90% reduction in internal IT support ticket requests, and basically going back to those owners of the software and asking for help or asking for clarification. So that's one way to measure it, is sort of saying, hey, post rollout. In this case, it's helpful that it was HR software because it's stuff people had to do for employment. In a CRM case, the danger is that you actually don't get asked those questions for support, right? You don't actually get people circling back. You just get people who ignore you, and you find out, later on that they weren't doing it. But we saw sort of 90% reduction in support tickets with this customer. And that basically goes to prove that when the information is right there, you are that much more likely to successfully incorporate that new information and completing your task or your process.
One of the things that I thought was novel was it seemed that there was some kind of, or at least one of your AI features, and that there was some intelligence to allow for flexibility in the process that the user would carry out. Because sometimes these things are rigid, where it's like, you have to click on this and you have to click on this. And it's like, click on a lead. Well, it could be many leads. It could be many different things. How did you solve for that problem of having a structure but creating flexibility at the same time?
Definitely. So there's certainly complexity in how you configure process instruction based on, if you take a CRM, for instance, you have parent URL pages and you have kind of children subpages, and we'll take a company record. And if you want process instruction to only show up for one specific company because they're very unique, versus do you want process instruction to show up for every company and all of those subpages and all those sub URLs? So that's one example where that's a power user feature that we help people learn how to modify and create. And it's actually very easy in practice, but it is a complicated, nuanced part of the technology and part of the delivery of the product. When you configure it right, it can be much more powerful, or you also realize there's many more edge cases. So this is why this experience, we actually work much more in a sales and success-led fashion versus product-led, because figuring out something like that is difficult. But yeah, you essentially want to say, hey, ask yourself a few questions about either a process or enablement tip. Is this something I want everybody to globally see on every instance of a page just like this? Or is it something we only want them to see uniquely on a specific page? So that's one question to ask. Another question to ask is this something we want people to see every time they come? Or is this something we only want them to see one time, and it really is just like see it for the first time and we don't want to show it again? So those are usually the main kind of, okay, if we're going to do real-time enablement in the flow of work, those are the two main questions, along with user groups and permissions. So do we want just new hires to see this, or experienced team members, or we want just the sales team to see this versus just the success team? Those are the main questions to ask, and you're on your way to providing like curated enablement.
Then in terms of the place of a tool like Tango within a bigger knowledge management ecosystem, so like I have a knowledge base, for instance, we use Confluence, and that's very important for some things. And then we also, like the company that I work for in my day job, we sell an LMS, and mostly targeting the L&D buyer, but some similar overlapping use cases. And so that has another repository of knowledge. Do you aim to eat all those things eventually and subsume them in your broader vision of where you'll be in like 5 or 10 years, or play alongside them? What will that look like?
Knowledge bases and LMSs serve very important functions that aren't necessarily going to go away. And that's really that general information about what is our industry, what is our product, who are our competitors, all of this information that you would need as context and background to be successful at then, using your tools and completing processes. So that's very much still critical and important. What we would argue is that you should not be teaching how to use software, how to complete tasks, how to go about process from within a knowledge base or an LMS. And if you want to reference it there, that's great. So we very much believe in deep linking process instruction, deep linking Tango workflows or folders from within knowledge bases or LMSs. And you can then go learn in the tools and actually experience the process through the tools instead of within a SCORM file or something embedded in LMS or a knowledge base. So that to us makes a lot of sense, to reinforce tool-based learning, systems learning in there, but actually trying to teach through a PowerPoint or put a video inside the knowledge base you expect people to watch and memorize. That's actually what we would expect to completely go away.
And do you see yourself, again, thinking about your product vision, could you ever be a complete knowledge management solution and have like your knowledge base? Or do you always imagine yourself partnering alongside other vendors like that in the knowledge management stack?
I think, and this is very much a partnership-driven vision, I believe. So if we do say, hey, there's many types of knowledge, there's many types of learning, some tools are going to be much more specific and well-suited for this type, and some are going to be more suited for that type. The question for real-time enablement, for what Tango is trying to do and help, it really is kind of the like co-pilot vision, right? Of help people while they work, while they're doing. Can we partner with other tools to surface their information in the flow of work when that's relevant? And bidirectionally, for LMSs, for example, you're always going to have cohort-based onboarding. You're always going to have crops of new hires starting, and they're going to need some hand-holding in their first number of weeks that's probably always best delivered through an LMS. And so is there bidirectional instruction then where stuff that might live in software and tools can also be served through the LMS? It's all about, I think, designing the best upfront learning experience and the best sort of knowledge management, serving knowledge when people need it. And that's likely going to be through a combination of tools.
Makes perfect sense. I want to pivot to you for a second and like your role in the org. You're the COO, which, like all operations jobs, it can mean many different things, I find. So I'm curious about how you see your role, your place within the org, the sorts of responsibilities you have.
If you actually go back and look at fundamentally what is operations, it is helping your company deliver and support your product or service offering, right? And be most efficient as possible in doing that. So operations to me is really everything outside of core product development or like core service delivery. And then if you think back office operations about how does our company be efficient to then ultimately deliver this product or service. And then you think about, and especially the last 10, 15 years, right? Like RevOps is the fastest growing job in certain 2023 reports, according to Forbes. A lot of these other function-specific operations groups are really about, okay, how do we make their efforts more efficient? So as we're a fast-growing kind of early-stage company by all means, but what does that mean? It's how do we most efficiently operationalize around bringing our core products to market? And so that's a little bit of back office in the early days, is overseeing some of that function, but also very much sales, marketing, support, success, and the enablement of those really customer-facing people on those teams. How do we set up structures and make sure all these groups and functions are speaking the same language, drawing on the same philosophy as they make their decisions, in as fluid a way as possible? And it's chaotic early on, but certainly as you hit milestones, you get more certainty and you build more foundation in different areas, and you're able to get more precise and more prescriptive.
As a COO, there's a pretty broad scope of activities that fall under your purview. And as a consequence of that, there are like a million things that you could be thinking about or doing at any given point in time. And I'm really interested in the problem of prioritization in a situation like that, because I think that's something that many operators can relate to at any level. So I'm curious, how are you making those decisions day to day? Like, I need to move this company forward, relatively early stage, as you said, it's chaotic. What am I going to do today? It's a hard question to answer sometimes.
It's the ultimate question to answer. It starts with working backwards from where are we in our product market fit journey when you're in early stages. And if you're an early stage company, whether you're a product or service, you're racing to the best version of product market fit that you can optimally achieve within your time frame. And working backwards from that helps you prioritize. So in certain weeks, we're not learning fast enough, right? Or like we are not, the feedback loop between sales and marketing is not strong enough to the point where we're putting out effective messaging or positioning because we're not understanding, what's actually happening on sales calls. And so that's like, okay, crap, we have to use call recording technology better. We have to set up a different meeting structure and a meeting cadence to achieve that. But it all comes from like, okay, we're not learning fast enough to help us get to product market fit. Or it could be like, hey, we're not having the right conversations. And so we really have to go look at what we're doing from a marketing perspective. So once you're kind of in the sort of more post-product market fit phase, I think the North Star then is you have your 6-12 months OKRs or strategy. That's kind of the time frame that I feel like is more in vogue now for all stage companies. Is 3 months is too little, and more than a year is too much. But you have your company level priorities and what's going to help you hit those the fastest. And so going and being maniacal about removing friction or blockers or organizational lethargy, right? How do you go find that stuff and blow through it? That's kind of the next prioritization function in my mind. And the last thing I'll mention is you do need a long-term mindset, right? So one of our values actually is this leave it better. And we highlight people within the company, within the team every month. And it's basically who's making sure that as we build and as we stand up new process or new functionality or a new go-to-market motion for the first time, who's thinking about the systems mindset, who's thinking long-term, that we're making decisions and we're implementing things in such a way that they're going to endure and we're not just cutting corners and hastily saying we completed tasks. So that to me is more a mindset. That's a culture, a values thing you need to build, harder to work into a prioritization structure. So we think about that one from a values perspective.
I really appreciate you coming on, sharing a bit about your journey and about how you're thinking about this problem. It's certainly, as I mentioned to you earlier, like I just nerd out about this stuff because it's so hard and I think so annoying when it doesn't work. It's really cool to find some ways to make it work better. So big fan of what you folks are doing. We'll include a link in the show notes for anyone listening who wants to check you out. And yeah, thanks for spending some time with me.
Of course. Loved having the conversation and love learning from you and all the other guests as well.
Cheers.
Hey everyone, I want to invite you over to the RevOps FM Substack community, where you can sign up to get rough transcripts, show notes, longer form articles, and other bonus content. Just head over to revops.fm/subscribe to get free access. I'd also love to know what you thought of the episode and to hear suggestions for topics you want to learn about. Feel free to leave a comment on Substack or send me an email at justin@revops.fm. Thanks for listening.